views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight we're going to continue our two-part series of best of programs to help celebrate the holidays, give us a chance to look back before we step forward into the new year. So this evening we have three segments that were picked out by producers and intern. And let's take a look. The first one, we're going to go back to June 7th of 2021. As you might recall, we not only did debates for the special elections, but we also did debates for the primaries. And that was a debate between the candidates running for the highly contentious 11th Council District. Producer Rebecca Hemick told us she chose this segment. It was the first debate in our special edition primary debates. She said the first question of the program was important to her because she suffers from asthma and allergies. As we know, the Bronx has one of the worst asthma rates in the nation. And she thought that hearing their opinion on this subject was so important. So let's go in there and see what the candidates for the 11th Council District had to say about environment and how it affects health in the Bronx. Let's take a look.
You had told the Norwood News that there are areas in the Bronx that still look like forests, underdeveloped public land that the city could utilize to help ease the housing crunch. You even mentioned areas around Co-op City, which would likely raise the eyebrows of Councilman Riley and others who live in that area. So are there empty forest land spaces in the 11th Council District that you would raise for housing? And of course, how would you soothe the concerns of both environmentalists and local neighbors who might not be in support of that kind of development?
Thank you for the question, Gary, and thank you for having me. So as we know, right, there's a housing crisis in New York City. We have over 60,000 families in our homeless shelters, and COVID has really exacerbated this to the point where it's now spilling over. There are areas in the 11th district, some in Woodlawn and some in Wakefield that just abut the 12th Council District. And I do believe that we can create real affordable social housing by using community land trusts, ensuring that we work with stakeholders in the community and that we use impact studies. We definitely have to incorporate impact studies into any development that happens in the 11th Council District.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dinowitz, you want to respond to that? Let's talk about housing and how we can create more.
I believe we need to preserve and expand green space, especially here in the Bronx, where so many of my former students, had difficulties with asthma. We need to be expanding green space. But we do have a housing crisis. That's why the first bill that I sponsored as a member of the City Council was the right to counsel, which allows people free legal counsel if they're facing eviction, so that they can stay in their homes. We do need to expand the amount of affordable housing, which is why the third bill that I sponsored in the council was a feasibility study to see if we can utilize empty office space as affordable housing. I also believe we need to legalize accessory dwelling units, which would expand the amount of affordable housing. At any time we do development in our community, it has to include the input of community members and take other things into account besides the number of units, including the impact on school seats and impact on the environment, traffic, parking, the environment, and of course, are they utilizing union labor or prevailing wages?
Thank you very much. Ms. Martin, welcome to the program. And what are your thoughts about building housing and how it should be done?
Now I'm muted. Gosh, are we out of practice? What's happening here? Just to pause for a second, as a parent with asthmatic kids who have missed 6 out of the last 15 days of school, sometimes green space and pollen can contribute to the asthma, but I'm just kidding. I mean, we absolutely need to have more green space in all of our neighborhoods, and that is a priority. I would not support converting any empty forest space to new housing. I think we have this opportunity right now in the city with empty office space. Let's convert some empty office space to affordable, permanent housing and supportive housing. I think whenever we're talking about addressing the affordable housing crisis, which absolutely has to be addressed in this city, we need to be asking questions about, can the neighborhood handle it? Can they handle the density? Is there enough room in the schools? Is it a transit-rich neighborhood? Can the electrical grid and the sewer grid handle the density there? So I absolutely think we need to address the affordable housing crisis in this city, but I think there's ways to do it, especially right now, without getting rid of more green space.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mr. Berkeley.
Well, I definitely agree with keeping our green spaces such as parks and everything, because people do need a place to go with the family and the rest of the community. However, we do have a homeless crisis. What I would like to do, and when I walk through the neighborhood, you see a space and then all of a sudden you see a building, you see construction, So what I would like to do is convert those areas, those open space areas into not affordable, because what is affordable? I like low income, and I'm always going to say low income because I don't know what's affordable.
30 seconds.
The AMI definitely has to be adjusted because our AMI is taken from Westchester. However, I do like low income housing. I think that when we do have those spaces, that they should be converted into housing, and we should move towards people owning their homes. Thanks a lot, Gary.
Thank you. Ms. Laura.
Yes, I agree that we need to have a balance, right? I would not support taking forest space or public open space to turn into housing, but the crisis needs to be addressed. Housing is a human right, and we have been legislating and acting as if it's not. And COVID just exacerbated this issue. So there's a few things. First, we need to make sure that people can stay in their homes. We do that by increasing housing vouchers. We do that by subsidizing rent for tenants who have lost their work and haven't been able to pay rents. And we make sure that there's a pipeline. There's a pipeline for those living in homeless shelter to housing that is actually affordable, as Carlton said, right? We need to be very clear on what that is and legislate to change the formula to use local income. Wall Street salaries and Westchester salaries don't represent District 11. So when we're building new housing, it needs to be those coming out of the shelter system. It needs to be those students who've graduated college and are looking for work, or young families, middle-class families. So it is about all of these things tackling at the same time.
Thank you. Dan Paternak, you get the final word unless somebody else has something else they wanted to add.
Great. Thanks, Gary. I like the forests in CD11. Most of them are in Van Cortlandt Park, and I like to preserve them as much as we can. In all seriousness, we do have a lot of green space in CD11 in different places. It's found in our parks, and Van Cortlandt Park is an amazing resource that we all share in CD11. There's Williamsbridge Oval. Woodlawn Cemetery, the reservoir is open space. These are the things that are beautiful about CD11. We need to preserve open space within our development as well. And there's ways to do that responsibly. One of the things that I propose is to streamline the variance process for buildings when they're being put up. Many times developers come to the local community boards. There's great input about how to make something better, but it's too costly because of the variance process. I want to change that. Definitely 15. Accessory units that'll create a lot of housing within our community. Definitely subsidize housing, especially for our seniors. I've represented tenants for years in housing court, keeping them in their homes. I know one of the biggest challenges is to get the money from the city and state of New York, and I'm going to work on that. Thank you, Gary.
It's always interesting to hear new dialogues about some of our old issues. Asthma, of course, still very current, but you get to hear new dialogues on how maybe we're going to deal with these things in the future. And now that, as you know, Councilmember Eric Dinowitz was elected to the city council, and he'll start right after the first of the year. We'll get a chance to see if he makes good on some of the things that he talked about. Nonetheless, on March 29th, we did a program on mental and behavioral health. And since the lockdown has been a rough road for all of us, we faced issues and never had to deal with many of those before. A lot more people needed mental health services, not only for themselves as adults, but also for their children as well. Were they cooped up? Are they going to be able to emotionally deal with their education? So Rebecca Hemick, our producer, decided maybe we ought to show off some of the information that came out about dealing with mental health. So we go back to March of 2021. Let's take a look.
Astor has a great reputation, and they've been working with children and families. Families, of course. I'm really interested in children. Talk to me about what you have found with the children, either in school or not in school. Give the same kind of overview that I just asked Ms. Doran about.
Sure, absolutely. I think the most challenging part of this entire pandemic was the fact that schools shut down and went remote. And if you had a child in school, that meant that potentially the first couple of weeks, you didn't know if your child was missing a class or not missing a class, because to get the technology and all the pieces in place was really challenging. So for us, the challenge was that continuity of care, right? Astor provides in-school-based mental health services in about 30 to 35 schools in the Bronx. So when the schools shut down, that meant that we weren't going to be able to be in the school as a provider providing those mental health services. So it meant that we had to figure out, how do we make sure that that child is engaged at home and that we are able to still provide them with that mental health service that they need. And it was a challenge. And we did it not just through through having a laptop available to do the teletherapy that we needed to, but we did it through the phone. We did it through FaceTime. We did it through whatever capacity we had to in order to make sure that that child was getting served and that they were getting that continuity with the least disruption as possible. What challenge?
Listen, these were very serious issues, and I'm sure for some of the children, they never had anything like those kind of issues and maybe never needed support. What were the kinds of things that you had to do to help kids, do better in every way?
Well, one of the things we saw multiple mental health diagnoses increase, where we would be seeing a child coming into us maybe with an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder diagnosis. Now we saw them not only having that diagnosis, but they were coming in having depression, anxiety, and really trauma as well as a result of some of them lost their family, they lost parents, they lost grandparents. So we have children who were not only already dealing with some level of depression or some level of anxiety. Now they have trauma because of the loss in the home. Some of them lost their homes because the parent lost their jobs. So we're really, really, struggling to make sure that the family stay connected, but that the child is getting through such a difficult time in the most, helpful way that we can for them.
This is really an important dialogue. I don't want to say happy to hear you say those things, but I think it's very important to say it, because when we hear about media and parents talking about, well, my child's not doing real well, it becomes kind of a generic thing. But to understand a child who lost mom or dad, imagine a child has to go through that, which it's just, my heart bleeds literally. Then they come out and they say, you have to wear your mask all the time. And the kid thinks it's like the video games that we shoot those guys down with masks. And now everybody they see, they can't see their faces. It's just, I wish I had the words. I don't have the words. And I have tremendous respect for you and the people who work with you for dealing with it. Do you find, and did your staff feel successful on some level, or are the problems so big that you're just treading water, keeping it going? Or did you feel that you really made some impact?
I mean, we definitely felt that we made some impact because we continued to provide the services that were needed. However, needless to say that we definitely still are in a situation where being able to work with the school systems is critical. You know, a lot of, and we've heard it from teachers in the Bronx who said to us, I'm trying to still engage this child in school. Meanwhile, I know that they're going through these issues. How do I get them to learn math and English when they're not in the mental state to be able to really learn the things that they need to learn? So we got to treat them.
And not only do those conditions exist, but we're doing it in a non-traditional way. And instead of looking at a teacher who might show a face of kindness, they're looking at the same computer screen I'm looking at. I can deal with this, but for a child who has needs and a Bronx kid, man, respect for you. One last question, and then we'll go back to Ms. Doran, and I do want to talk about what we need now as we're really going to bring the kids back to school and what kind of care they need. But I want to talk about the insurance. Ms. Doran talked about governmental support for some of the services, that it was very useful because COVID-related services were covered. Did you find, or do you find you have that same financial support, or is it still kind of like a problem because many of the people don't have adequate health care, or they have health care that, they pay $400 a month and they still got to pay $80 a visit, Give me some of that so we can understand, the whole ballpark here.
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to deny a child who needs access to care that access. However, it is obviously a strain on the organization to take those cases. But I would say that, we need to make sure that the children are insured and are getting the services that they need. And that's our primary focus. And how we pay for it is something that as an organization, we have to figure out, right? We work with our legislators, we work with the commercial payers and everybody that we need to. But technology now, I have to say, is one of the most important things that we need. We need to be able to have the bandwidth. We need to be able to have the laptops, the phones available for both the families and for the clinicians and the workers to be able to do their jobs. So in terms of resources, that's a big part of it. We do need that technology.
Well, it's a very difficult situation when the people who you are serving don't have the technology. I mean, that really it just creates a dynamic that sometimes seems to me practically unsolvable. I know I have some things I want to follow up with Ms. Doran about, but I know I was watching you while you were listening. Just give me your response to some of the things that you heard.
So, Yvette spoke very eloquently about the needs of children. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that while the virus will end, thank goodness, the psychological impact of it is not going to end for a very long time because of what Yvette spoke about, particularly with children who have sustained loss, food insecurity, trauma. That doesn't heal overnight. And so I think that our community of provider agencies are going to have to open their doors and serve children and adults affected for a long time to come.
Well, there you go. It's the kind of thing that is still being debated. In fact, this week there was dialogue about how the city is going to be providing mental health services in the schools, and it's ongoing. And of course, we cover it here on BronxTalk. Many people believe, and it's partially true, that BronxTalk is largely a political show. We do the political debates. Elected officials and candidates come on all the time. Going back to October of this year, freshman Congressman Jamaal Bowman was on our show. Our intern from Mercy College, Amy Mbaye, selected this one. In this segment, Representative Bowman talked about raising the debt limit, infrastructure bill, and the Biden economic agenda, the child tax credit, vaccine mandates in schools, criminal justice in the Bronx, and much more. I found it to be one of our best interviews for the year, and our intern, Amy, agreed. So here is Representative Jamaal Bowman, and it goes back to October 2021.
Well, I think it's always a good time to have intelligent dialogue and smart conversations about what's happening in our country, where we are and where we're trying to go, whether it's the elimination of the debt limit or expanding the Supreme Court. I mean, we're still operating from, a constitution which is sacred, but which was implemented 245 years ago, and there's been amendments to it. And we need to discuss, what changes we need to make in our country going forward, whether it's reversing Citizens United, eliminating the debt limit, or expanding the court. I think we should always be having intelligent conversations about our country and where we are and where we need to go, without being, and this is what I was going to say about McConnell and the Republicans, without being antagonistic, without bringing vitriol or hate into the conversation. It's just dialogue. Dialogue is healthy for a democracy.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I do want to get to the infrastructure bill and what that could mean for the borough of the Bronx. But how would eliminating, if you could do it in a brief statement, how would eliminating the debt limit work, and how would it change the economy for the better, as you believe it will?
Well, some have argued that the president could simply mint $1 trillion coin that we borrow against, going forward for our economy. That's one way it could work. There are other ideas out there as well. But I think that brings up a larger conversation about how do we judge the health and well-being of our economy? Is GDP alone the proper measure, or should there be other measures? When you look at how wealth inequality, how large it is in our country, and how some at the top benefit disproportionately from it, there's a lot of conversations to have about our economy. And, minting of a coin is one aspect of the debt limit conversation, but there are many others. So,
well, this is a perfect segue to talk about the infrastructure bill. Can we write checks for anything we want? I mean, that's really the question in this case. You're talking about climate change, child tax credit, helping families. I mean, a whole list of considerations potentially in the 3.5 trillion being asked for. And of course, the kickback is you can't just keep printing money. So can we keep printing money and say, well, 3.5 trillion, why not 4 trillion? Because you can probably find uses for that money as well.
So yes, we can. The federal government can authorize spending, what some call deficit spending, as it needs to. We did it in response to COVID. Last year we injected upwards of $5 trillion into the economy to respond to COVID and keep our economy going. We did it many years ago when we decided to put a man on the moon. We invested a lot of money in NASA to make sure we got that done. We did it when we created a public school system, when we implemented Title I programs. The conversation, in my opinion, is less about the quote unquote costs when we talk about the federal government, and more about what are the needs of our economy. And in my opinion, those needs are housing as a human right, healthcare as a human right, exemplary education for everyone, childcare that is universal, and workforce development that unlocks the potential earning power of each individual. And then on the other side of that, we have to stop allowing the wealthy to hide trillions of dollars in tax havens overseas. I don't know if you saw the recent article, literally $17 trillion are hidden in tax havens right now. We have to make sure corporations and international corporations contribute to our democracy, and the wealthy contribute their fair share. Those things aren't happening. So while, we can have a debate about is the government spending more, we also have to have a debate about is the wealthy contributing their fair share to our economy? And that answer is no. Now, states and counties and cities, it's more of a balanced checkbook situation, right? It's just like a kitchen table, balancing your checkbook, making sure you're okay. The federal government historically has authorized spending. Our push is now make sure we spend on care workers, our seniors, the poor, people of color, and most of all, women, to get them back to work after COVID.
Is there a pushback or a legitimate concern, which is what you hear, doing what you're suggesting will raise inflation and will ultimately, we don't have that money, and you talk about comparing it to a personal bank account. I don't borrow what I can't, what I don't have readily available. I don't know that I can pay back. So the pushback to that is you just can't keep printing money.
Mm-hmm. So we deal with inflation by ensuring the wealthy pay their fair share. The wealthy is not contributing their fair share to our tax system. Neither are corporations, neither are internationals. That's how you deal with the issue of inflation. They have trillions of dollars sitting in tax havens around the world that should be a part of the American economy, and it's not. So that's one way to deal with inflation. And as I mentioned before, the American government has a history of investing in our economy or deficit spending. Trump just did it, I believe in 2000, I forget the year. When was he? 2017, when he gave trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the wealthy. Trump just did it. And there was no conversation about, well, we can't afford to do that. We also did it with the New Deal. I mean, the New Deal in response to the Great Depression, in response to World War II, we implemented the New Deal. We built the middle class, and that became a time where the middle class was thriving as much as ever in American history. Now, Blacks and Latinos were kept out of that because of redlining, but this time we're trying to do it right to make sure everyone is included.
Okay, there you go. Some of the best of our program for 2021. We don't anticipate stopping. We're going to be around for 2022 as well. And every now and then we'll step back and show you some of the best of, because many of the interviews we do are relevant from then when we do them right up until today. So we'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to talk about environment in the Bronx and how we're going to deliver electricity to the borough of the Bronx, hopefully in an environmental way. And so we'll see you then. Happy holidays.